Hello, everyone, and welcome to Recycled Programs. My voice was echoey. I'm just trying to be super pretentious. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Papa Lavaloo, my new workout playlist. Yes, yeah, that is what I listen to classical music on the elliptical. It really gets my juices flowing. No. But hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Recycled Programs. It's a little bit more of a serious stream. It is not my typical show. You can tell by typing in exclamation point, not a show. Typically, my best friend Pablo and I stream together, and we just talk about random stuff. But today's going to be a little bit different. Hello! And welcome. Today's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about stuff that I actually know stuff about, I suppose. So, welcome. Today's topic is Broadway, because I like Broadway a lot. And so, yes, I'll be talking about Broadway for a little while. It was also suggested in one of my Facebook comments when I talked about starting this show that I do the topic of Broadway history and what I think Broadway will be in the future. And so that is what today's stream is going to be about. If you'd like to chat with me, you're more than welcome to do so. I'd love to answer questions you guys have about anything, not just Broadway. Of course, if it gets too ridiculous, I'll just have to ignore you, because I am super serious. And that's what this stream is about, me being super serious, apparently. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to be super serious the whole time. But I do want to talk about Broadway because it is something that is super interesting to me. Not only am I a musical theater person myself, but I'm really interested in teaching, and I think Broadway history is one of those things that I could teach. I've done a little bit of research on it, and I really enjoy talking about it. So that's a little bit about me, I guess, and on to the show. Da-da-da-da. I gotta have sound cues. It's like, I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, I might even play a little something later on in the stream if you guys are interested. But for now, Broadway. So I haven't been keeping up with Broadway lately, mostly because Broadway was shut down for a long time. So I don't know if anybody's doing anything right now. The world is kind of a scary do Freebird. No, I'm not gonna do Freebird. Although that would be funny. No, but yeah, the world is kind of a dangerous, scary place right now, especially for live performances. You know, it's hard to pack 1,000 people into an auditorium to do a live theater show. So I haven't been keeping up with a lot of Broadway. I know it shut down for a long time. I don't know if they're back up yet, but I do look forward to the time in which they do get back up and running. I'm very excited about it. But I kind of stopped following it towards the end of last year. So around this time a year ago. And around this time a year ago, I actually looked it up, and there were 786 Broadway shows in all of history. 786. And there have only been, at least in the sense of American Broadway, there have only been American Broadway shows around for 153 years. So to have 786 different shows written in 153 years, that means that like 5 new musicals would be coming out every single year, which is just on average, I mean, which is just crazy to me, especially since the first 20 years or so, even 30 or 40 years, the first few years of it were all like maybe one show every few years, and so that's a lot of creativity and a lot of just production just being pumped out every single year, which is pretty awesome. So that's something that excites me. Um, it's just crazy to think about that. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, Broadway actually started in America as sort of like, well, it was more opera than anything else. And so it started in the late 1800s, and it started with the operas such as like the HMS Pinafore and the Pirates of Penzance and the Mikado, which a lot of people don't even know what those things are anymore, which is okay, I suppose. But they're really classic operas written by Gilbert and Sullivan, and I was actually in a show once called Mr. Burns, the character off of The Simpsons. But I was in a show called Mr. Burns where I had to actually perform a song from the Mikado, and it was interesting just looking into the history of all of that and seeing that it was one of the original Broadway musicals ever to be in New York, which was kind of cool. Now, of course, the shows like the HMS Pinafore, like the Gilbert and Sullivan operas, they were also all performed in London, and London had their own Broadway well before America did. When America had I guess they didn't even really have Broadway for a while, but when they had live theater, it wasn't really popular. To to put it into context, I know this sounds like a lot, but those three shows in particular, the HMS Pinafore and the Mikado and Pirates of Penzance, they only had 500 performances originally. And I know that sounds like a lot, but when you think about it, one of the most popular shows on Broadway, still currently I believe it's running, well, obviously nothing's running now, but one of the most popular shows on Broadway is Phantom of the Opera. And compared to the 500 from the HMS Pinafore, Phantom of the Opera has 13,900 performances. So, a few more, I suppose. just a little bit of an increase there. But yeah, they definitely weren't popular, and I think if Broadway had kind of continued in that direction, the direction of that very opera style, very showy, not much story, but, very melodramatic kind of style to it, I don't think Broadway would have lasted as long as it has now. And it certainly wouldn't be what it is today if it didn't progress. Pablo Baloo says, I like that Disney incorporated classical opera music to the Three Musketeers. Yeah, it was cool to see it being used in modern productions. Absolutely. I do love it when there's a little taste of opera or classical music even. That's actually why I chose to have classical music in the beginning of my show here, is because I like when classical music is used in modern productions and stuff like that. I think it's very interesting. It's because the storytelling of classical opera and classical instrumental music like that, the storytelling is still there. It's just a different story than what we're used to, I suppose. And so when Disney uses it a lot in all of their storytelling. Actually, I know Pablo and I were talking about Dumbo at one point in time. We were talking about Pink Elephants. I mean, that's just classical music, but it's put to animation and it tells a very different story. And you could even go so far as to say that all of the John Williams themes are classical music, but da 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 da, you know exactly what movie that's from. just based on that theme. And so it does really continue to tell that story. For those of you who didn't know what movie that's from, it's Indiana Jones. But anyway, so yeah, I definitely feel like the beginnings of musical theater in America were a little bit shaky. People didn't really connect with the operas. The other thing that is interesting to note about those particular operas is they were primarily about life in Europe, and life in the Americas, or life in America, was very different than life in Europe, especially in, the late 1800s. And so, just 100 years after the Revolutionary War, things started to split quite a bit, and so it didn't really tell the story that Americans wanted to hear. And so there brings the introduction of American, actors and America into the stories, which is interesting. One of the biggest things that really actually brought America into Broadway was the introduction of African Americans into the theater. And it seems kind of early, especially in our history, the way we think about it. This is before civil rights. This is before all of that. But it was, and not necessarily in a Jim Crow sense, but like actual portrayals of talented African Americans in Broadway was a very interesting pivotal point in American theater. And iconically, one of the most predominant productions that really flipped the switch for America was Showboat. Showboat was pretty awesome because it was the first fully integrated Broadway show, and it was it was about racial issues too, which was just even more powerful. So that's pretty interesting, and that was written by Oscar Hammerstein. Hammerstein? I always get that wrong. I don't know which one. Oh well. But that one was actually written in Old Man River, exactly. And it was written in the early 1900s, and you don't usually think about that when it comes to African Americans being like a predominant force in the early 1900s before the Civil Rights Movement, but it was huge. It was a huge deal that Broadway really allowed them to shine before the America as a whole really even accepted them, which was interesting. I feel like it was massively powerful. I always like to think that the arts really paves a good path for society, and it dictates where society is going to go, and it comments on society too. And the fact that there was a fully integrated show in the 1920s was pretty awesome for America as a whole. I don't know that, Showboat really led to the Civil Rights Movement, but it certainly was a piece in the puzzle. And think about Broadway now. If African Americans had never been introduced into the theater, especially at such an early point, we wouldn't have shows like Hamilton, And it is the same thing now. Obviously, it's not the same. We're past the Civil Rights Movement, and things are different now in the 21st century. But having Hamilton was interesting because it reintroduced African Americans into the theater. And it made it possible for African Americans and minorities of all sorts to play parts that they would not necessarily be typecast in or recommended for typically. Before Hamilton, I don't think you would have ever seen an African American playing George Washington. But now you see it and you're like, well, that was obviously the right choice for Hamilton. It was so well done. And so yeah, Showboat was very pivotal in that kind of thing. And yeah, Old Man River, of course. And that's the other thing too. It left a lasting mark on people. Like I know Pablo is obviously a musical theater person as well, and so you would almost expect him to know Old Man River. But even if you're not a musical theater person, you still, like, a lot of people still know Old Man River, and it still affects people on in large numbers, and that's pretty awesome. Um, One of the things that was interesting about Showboat was it's it was like the beginning of musical comedy with realism attached to it. A lot of the operas, like the HMS Pinafore and stuff like that, there was little to no realism. It was all very showy and prim and proper, and nobody acted like they would in real life. But Showboat was, again, one of the first displays of realism in a musical. And, a lot of people even now complain about how musicals don't feel real. Well, just imagine going to a show in 1874 and thinking, wow, this sucks. Because nobody's real. They're all just acting. And Showboat really provided an opportunity for people to get it and like really latch on to musical theater and musical comedy because it was more real and it told real stories, and it was more about real life to Americans especially. Just again because the other stories were talking about Europe and high society, and America wasn't much like that yet anyway. So yeah, Showboat was huge, and that kind of led the way with realism. It just brought it out into the open, and Oscar Hammerstein, I'm gonna mess that up the entire stream. It's fine. But he ended up finding a new writing partner. He wrote with I forget who now. See, this is how you know I know what I'm talking about. I forget who he wrote with on Showboat, but anyway, he found a new writing partner moving into the next couple of decades, and he worked with Richard Rodgers, and that really, yes, Hart, yes. Hart and Hammerstein. I can't remember his first name, but you are right. It is Hart. Was it Richard Hart? It could have been Richard Hart, because it was, or maybe I'm just getting it. No, I'm talking about Showboat. Yeah, Showboat. Showboat was written by I feel like it's something with a J, and I can't remember it at all. But that's okay. It'll come to me. I know what I'm talking about. I swear. This is not a show. Exclamation point, not a show, I swear. But anyway, Rodgers and Hammerstein, again. Jerome Robbins or something like that. Jerome something. Yes, you're right, Pablo. Thank you. I appreciate it. He thanks you too, even though he's been dead for quite some time. But yeah, anyway, Oscar Hammerstein found a new writing partner in Richard Rodgers, and they focused on realism in the biggest sense of that. They focused on storytelling, and one of the biggest things that we, as Broadway in America, got from them was we got the storytelling songs. So we got songs that weren't just additions to the plot, but rather we got songs that told the plot and really furthered that plot and made it so that the audience could understand the storyline through that point of view as well. And so that was one of Rodgers and Hammerstein's big thing. Jerome Kern, that's what it was. Thank you. But yeah, we got a ton of. You looked it up, didn't you? I bet you did. Jerome Kern. But yeah, so with Rodgers and Hammerstein, we got those songs that tell the story. Their primary focus when writing songs was to not make it detract from the story. That's not a word, but distract from the story, and not make it take anything, not make it take anything away from the story in any sense. And so they wrote songs to add to the story that weren't extraneous. They furthered the plot. They were really ingrained in the musical itself, and we got, I guess, what is known now as the book musical. And that just means that the entire musical was dictated by the plot. And I think one of the biggest Broadway shows of all time is one of theirs, and it's Oklahoma. And Oklahoma is interesting. Oklahoma came out in 1943, and so, it was in this interesting time where, we had been dealing with all of this, especially in Broadway. We had been dealing with all of this schmacky kind of false acting for a while. We're starting to guide our way into realism, and then World War II happened, and people wanted an escape, and people wanted a way back to simpler times, I guess, if you can call it that, and a little bit of peace and harmony in the world, and Oklahoma was that, and that's why I feel like it had such success. Not only so it's interesting, Oklahoma as well, because it doesn't talk about any huge issues. I mean, the main plot is there's this girl, and she's deciding who she wants to go dancing with, and that is the entire plot. It's just who she's picking to go dancing with. And so we took everything unnecessary out of it, and we just focused on the simplest of stories. And you can even hear it right at the very beginning, because that show doesn't start with, everybody's talking about the big Broadway show-stopping number at the very beginning of the show. It really opens everything up and puts you in the right mood for a musical. Well, Oklahoma started with someone singing off stage, and they were singing entirely a cappella. So it really stripped it down to the bare necessities, even with it being a musical. And with talking about musicals, you also have to talk about the music, the dancing, the acting, the set, the everything about it. And the set was simple. The acting was simple. The songs were just simple. Everything about Oklahoma was peace and harmony, and it was just absolutely minimalist. And I think that's one of the reasons that it was super successful. I know, so I've talked with, I went to college at the University of Dubuque, and one of the music professors there, Dr. Charles Barland, I talked with him at length about Oklahoma specifically, and he even said that Oklahoma was both revolutionary in music and the way the story was told, and he talks about how it became a serious story, even though it's just the simplest little thing, it was finally serious, and musical theater could be taken seriously. And Broadway musicals, it used to be called musical comedy, but Rodgers and Hammerstein changed that, and so it really put a focus on what's real. And now, because of stuff like that, you get real shows. Well, like, Hamilton, again, I'm going to bring up Hamilton a lot, and Dear Evan Hansen, because they're brand new on Broadway. Brand new meaning within the last decade. And, with those shows, they're not necessarily comedies. I mean, Dear Evan Hansen isn't a comedy by any means. Hamilton isn't a comedy. They're not necessarily tragedies either. There are tragic moments and tragic elements about them, but they're just real stories. And Rodgers and Hammerstein really, really put a focus on that. And so those musicals, I don't think would be possible today without the influence and the effect that Rodgers and Hammerstein had on Broadway, and what happened with it. And even after Oklahoma, everybody started wanting to do book musicals. Everybody started doing that. Everybody latched on to the idea that plot was the driving force and that stories needed to be told. And that musical theater wasn't just about singing songs and dancing and having fun, but musical theater could also be something that was super serious, and you could tell a very powerful and a very impactful story just with music and acting, and that sometimes even the music could make it a little more powerful. So that was pretty huge, and like Dr. Barlin said, revolutionary in musical theater as a whole. It really, really shaped what Broadway is today. And I do want to re-mention a couple of dates because they will become important later. So, Showboat, Introduction of African Americans, 1927. Oklahoma, book musical, 1943. So those dates are going to become important when I talk more about the future of Broadway and what I see coming, because as you'll come to find out throughout the rest of this very serious podcast, I think that musical theater as a whole is very cyclical, or as Greg would say, it's cylindrical. And so it kind of follows the same path it always has, and I feel like it always will, as long as society allows it to. And we'll get more into that later. But first, I want to talk about jazz. In the least condescending way possible. Jazz. But yeah, so obviously keeping in mind that story is primary from this point on because of Rodgers and Hammerstein. Story became... No, don't leave just because I'm talking about jazz. No, no. But so keeping in mind that story is most popular from now on, we have to talk about the introduction of the jazz era and what happened because of society and because of the music that was being played at the time. Now, obviously, there has been jazz for a very long time. Beginning even before this, but beginning in the 1920s. And then moving all the way up through the 50s and 60s, there were styles of jazz that were going through those eras. And of course, they had to seep their way into the Broadway scene. And at least I can see this most notably with the full jazz musical Guys and Dolls. And Guys and Dolls came out in 1950. And I feel like Guys and Dolls was a response to the jazz singer greats like Tony Bennett and like Frank Sinatra. It Guys and Dolls was them. It was all about that lifestyle and jazz, to be honest. And jazz or Guys and Dolls focused specifically on the compositions of Frank Lesser. And he wrote jazz music before Guys and Dolls, but then not only did he write music previous to that, then he wrote for Guys and Dolls, and then some songs in Guys and Dolls were based off of his works, but not written by him. And then, he was kind of the driving force behind that musical, and so he was a jazz great. And it was super interesting because as soon as Guys and Dolls came out, it was one of the first musicals that actually had popular covers, I guess. I guess you could call it. Frank Sinatra did a version of one of the songs from Guys and Dolls, Luck Be a Lady. And he put it on his album. I mean, he did a Broadway show tune and put it on his album. And that wasn't really popular before the days of Guys and Dolls. It was nobody was doing Three Little Maids from School from the Mikado on their newest pop albums. But Frank Sinatra took it upon himself to take one of these great jazz works that was written specifically for theater and say, I'm going to use that on my album, and I'm going to do a cover of that. And it really skyrocketed not only the song, but the musical in its entirety. And even so, Bob Fosse is one of the greatest choreographers and dancers of all time. And even he said that Guys and Dolls was the greatest American musical of all time. And I would have to say that it really, really opened things up to do some of the stuff that we can do today. Especially when it comes to later on doing full concept albums and then putting them on stage and stuff like that. I mean, Hamilton was actually popular as an album before tickets were sold. And so that's pretty incredible that Guys and Dolls was kind of the same way, where a lot of people heard the music from Guys and Dolls before they even saw the show, just because people like Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett made it popular. But yeah, it definitely was a shift in musical theater as well, because it also obviously was a shift in musical style too. And so it went from these classical songs, like here, I'm gonna do a thing. It went from classical songs to something like it went from these very traditional, very classical songs to jazz and reharmonizing things. And so it really also opened up the door to modern music, and really playing with harmony in a musical sense, and not just making it a solo or a traditional duet or everybody singing like at church or something like that. And so it really did pave the way for artists like even today's, Pasek and Paul, who wrote Dear Evan Hansen. And Pasek and Paul also wrote not only Dear Evan Hansen, but they wrote La La Land and James and the Giant Peach, which is a huge jazz musical now, and Dogfight, which Dogfight is a little less jazz, a little more folksy, but it has all the jazz roots, and stuff like that wouldn't be possible today without the 1950s Guys and Dolls. And so not only does Broadway kind of, open up doors because society opened them up for Broadway to use, but also you can kind of see how every event in Broadway history opens up the door for the next event. And so yeah, it's a pretty interesting chain of events there. So when it comes to that door being opened, in just a minute I'm going to take a break here, but that opens the door for a little more of an unconventional take on music, a little bit more of an unconventional take on plot as we move through the decades, and I'm very excited to share that with you guys. So I am going to take just a quick break, but I will be back shortly. Enjoy this intermission music while you wait. Hello, and welcome back. Thanks for hanging in there. I appreciate it. I am officially back. And we left off talking about, obviously, Broadway, but talking about jazz, and talking about how jazz really opened doors in an interesting and unconventional way. And I think society really helped out with dictating this next kind of shift in Broadway. You can really tell Broadway's shifts by the wars that America is involved in, because, to be honest, art is an expression of what's going on and what the people want and how the people feel and stuff like that. And so, of course, when America got involved in the Vietnam War, if you know anything about that part of history, you know that a lot of people hated it and were rebelling against it, and there was this uprising of, the hippie movement and burning draft cards and all kinds of stuff like this. It was huge, and it was a really big deal. And with that came an uprise in, number one, drug use, and number two, a huge deal with rock music. Rock music. Oh, that devil-worshipping rock music, which is funny now, but people actually thought it back in the day. And with, of course, all of the influence of this drug use and the hippie movement and the rock movement and all of that, the idea of being completely free, and I mean even nudity was involved in that. Like nudism saw a huge increase, especially with the hippie movement and stuff like that. With that, Broadway was influenced in a very unconventional way. And because of the involvement in the Vietnam War in the 50s and 60s, Towards the end of the 60s, in 1968, we had the musical Hair. And although, uh, like as I mentioned, Bob Fosse, he said that Guys and Dolls was the greatest American musical of all time. In my opinion, I think Hair was the most influential musical of all time. And it's because Hair really showed that you could just do anything on stage. And whether it was entertaining or impactful, or whether it was to hurt the audience or to make them feel welcome or anything, Hair was was a walking controversy, and it really made it possible for other musicals to exist and to push the boundaries of society on stage in front of the world. And it was all about rebellion, and it was all about drugs and nudity and rock. And in fact, not only was it all about rock, it was the first musical of all time for the score to be entirely rock band. It was just a rock band. That's all it was. And musicals in the past, even if they were jazz, they would have a full orchestra. It was a full, there was a string section and everything. So for this to just be a rock band was so wildly different. And so Hair was interesting. It really pushed the envelope when it comes to musical theater and what it meant to be a Broadway musical. And like I said before, with musicals, having that ability to last, like Old Man River or like Luck Be a Lady from Guys and Dolls, we got Age of Aquarius from Hair. And so a lot of people recognize the song Age of Aquarius, and it's actually from the musical Hair. It was written for the musical Hair, and then a popular group of the time actually covered it. And of course, that is the most popular cover. Most people know it. Most people don't know the original Broadway sound recording of Age of Aquarius. But still, to this day, a ton of people know Age of Aquarius. And it's because of the 1968 rock musical Hair. And so it was just so influential and so intriguing that it could push those boundaries. And it was a little bit rejected by society, and still to this day, first of all, if you're in high school, you can't do Hair as one of your high school musicals because there's too much, rated R stuff. And college campuses rarely dare to do Hair, and community theater never does because there could be kids there, and so there's all kinds of things that kind of, society still to this day rejects Hair, but it was still a Broadway musical, and it still had massive success in 1968 when it was written and when it was first performed. And I guess that really speaks to how the times influence Broadway and how Broadway can really speak to the people of that era and that time. And in 1968, everybody wanted to hear Hair. They wanted to know it and they wanted to see it. But sometimes Broadway pushes those boundaries and it's ahead of its time a little bit. And I think that was definitely the case for one of my all-time favorite musical composers, Stephen Sondheim. Sondheim wrote very shortly after Hair. He started writing his own musicals. He had actually worked with Rodgers and Hammerstein in the past, and he had worked with others in the past on musicals. but he had never written his first show until 1970. And that was his first solo show that he wrote himself. And it was so ahead of its time that it actually saw very, very little success. And the show that I'm talking about is Company. And a lot of people, even now, don't know what Company is. They've never really heard of it. Even in the Broadway world, a lot of people don't know what Company is. Because again, it was so ahead of its time. But Company was about as true to society and real as realism can get. And it was all about emotional vulnerability, and it pulled on the heartstrings of the audience in too real of a way. It worked too well, and it was a little bit dark, and they were dealing with conflict, and it was just too ahead of its time. Now, of course, I've got to talk about other Sondheim musicals, because he's written a lot. Most noteworthy are Into the Woods and Sweeney Todd. And of course, Into the Woods and Sweeney Todd are also both very dark. And if you haven't heard them, so Into the Woods is about all of these fairy tale creatures and how their lives are intertwined. And the entire first act is great and all happy and everything. And then in the last act, everything goes wrong. And people die, and it's dark and tragic. And so it was all about that sort of not so happily ever after and that dark resolution. And then Sweeney Todd, to contrast the happy beginning, Sweeney Todd is literally about a murderer. Sweeney Todd is about a man who went through a tragedy, and in retaliation to that tragedy, he started murdering people, just as a pastime, because he could. And so, Sondheim does love flexing, that is for sure. But yeah, Sondheim, he really enjoyed telling those dark stories and showing society the dark side of itself. And especially early on, people didn't like that. As you could imagine, people didn't like seeing the darkness of their own world, especially when they went to the theater. Up until then, theater was all about, especially with the introduction of Hair, theater was all about being free and being happy and getting away from the pressures of the world and from the darkness of the world and having a break from all of that. And, with Oklahoma, taking it back to the simplicity of life and all of that. And it was so happy. And Sondheim came by and said, but real life has tragedy in it too. And we should talk about that. And nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody was into it, unfortunately. So Sondheim early on was rejected. And truly he was ahead of his time. And especially for 1970, which, again, right in the thick of the exactly. He was rejected until emo Broadway. We'll get to emo Broadway. It's fine. We'll get there. But yeah, he was rejected, especially with this hippie movement that was all about love and peace and harmony and not wanting to deal with the problems of the outside world and not having to deal with tragedy in that sort of way. And what's interesting is more recently, in the 2000s, there have been 2 films, at least. I don't know if there's been a film version of Company, but there's been a film version of Into the Woods, and there's been a film version of Sweeney Todd, and both showed massive success, which says to me that Sondheim just rode ahead of his time, and now people are ready to deal with the tragedy. In fact, at least in my opinion, now watching tragedy is a good way to say, well, at least my life isn't that bad. At least I don't, I haven't lived through a tragedy and now have to turn to murdering people as my only source of, content with the world. And so, it did show massive success now after some time. And so Sondheim was just truly ahead of his time, and I hope that Sondheim realizes that now is a perfect time to continue doing what he started in the 70s. And you can even hear it in the songs. So in Company specifically, I wish I could show you guys, but I can't. So if you go look at Company Being Alive, you'll start hearing there's this ambiguity to it, and you're not really sure if the other characters are there with the main character. I believe there's a Tony performance of it with Neil Patrick Harris playing the main character in this case. But there's this ambiguity where you're not sure if those other characters are there or if they're just the voices in his head. And there's also this rhythmic ambiguity to it. Sondheim flexed so hard when it came to music writing. He never wrote the same thing twice, and he always had a purpose for every single thing that he wrote. And so you can definitely tell in Being Alive where everything, the melody more or less stays the same, but everything rhythmically kind of changes a little bit, and you're not sure when the phrase is really going to end, and it's unexpected the way the singer performs it, and so it's just interesting and different, and in my opinion, I absolutely love it. But again, it's not what the audience in 1970 expected or really even wanted. They were not interested in that. They wanted something that really spoke to them in a way that they could predict it, and they knew what they were getting into when they went to the theater. And so it's just interesting because, it's completely different than that. So now it's interesting because a lot of things have already been done, and so that intricate, weird timings and stuff, those are what people look for, and it makes it more fun for them, and instead of just hearing the same thing over and over again. I've noticed a lot in pop music even that, especially in the early 2000s, you could predict everything. Pop music was all the same all across the board. But now in pop music, people give pop music a bad rep, but now in pop music, people are looking for that variety. They're looking for changes, and so it's not all the same. And a lot of work goes into the production of a pop song because it can't just be the same. People are looking for interest, and so that's, they're looking for unconventional. And I think so. Sondheim should be writing pop music now. Sondheim was just way too ahead of his time. But another thing that was happening in the 70s is, unconventional-wise anyway, we were starting to get away from traditional storytelling too. Now, of course, Sondheim liked to tell real stories about real people, but then he wrote stuff like Into the Woods, where it wasn't necessarily about real people. It was a fantasy, and it was about all of these different fairy tales meeting, which never happens in a fairy tale. And so it was a weird take on a story, and so storytelling changed a lot, and you can see that a lot in Chorus Line, which was written in 1975. Chorus Line didn't even really, arguably, it didn't really have a plot. And so it was this musical that was all about dancers. And up to this point, the dancers were not the ones in the spotlight. The dancers were the one in the background. They added to the musical and they helped tell the story, but they were never the main character. And of course, when Marvin Hamlish wrote a chorus line, he wanted to tell the story of the dancers. And he wanted to bring them from the background to front and center. And so he wrote a chorus line to tell that story of the dancers. And each song in a chorus line is just another dancer's point of view. But there's no real plot. And so, unconventionally, again, we're straying away from the 30-year-long stretch that we've had of doing these very traditional book musicals, and where plot dictates everything. And now we're opening up the door to telling these introspective musicals, or musicals with unconventional plot lines, or musicals where there is no plot, where it's just all about entertainment again, but in a different way. And so it has become very interesting. And just coasting off that, at the same time, other people were writing musicals that were less unconventional, or I suppose more conventional, to kind of tailor to the audience that's like, but I come to the theater to expect a certain thing, and I want a certain thing when I get here. And that's where you get the more traditional musicals that people like Andrew Lloyd Webber wrote. And he started to tailor things to a more traditional audience. He started to tailor things to a more Christian audience as well. And he started going back to the basics of theater and what theater used to be. And he went all the way back to the 1870s with the opera. But this type of musical used contemporary music instead, and so it's considered a rock opera. But it's told in the same way. It's fully music, there's no dialogue, but everything is sung all the way through, and it's fully orchestrated all the way through, and it tells the story that way. Just like the HMS Pinafore and the Mikado did. They rarely had any dialogue, everything was sung. And with Jesus Christ Superstar and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, they were written in the 70s as well, and they tailored to that audience that wanted the traditionalism of theater. But also, they tailored to an audience that still liked modern music, and so it was a rock opera. And another thing that's at least noteworthy about rock operas, especially in the early 70s, with Jesus Christ Superstar, written in 1971, they actually released, I told you I'd get back to this, they released an album before the show was ever released. And so they had a full concept album for Jesus Christ Superstar that they put on vinyl and released to the world, and people loved it. And so then they put it on stage. But they actually recorded everything before it was on stage. And so I guess they just completely abandoned the idea of theater for a minute. And they marketed it in a whole new way. They put the music out there for people to enjoy first. And then that's what got them back to the theater, especially after seeing shows like Company and like Chorus Line, where they were uncomfortable with how the theater was going. They put out this more traditional style stuff and said, well, maybe that'll get interest up. And sure enough, it did. Jesus Christ Superstar is still one of the top-selling musicals, and Andrew Lloyd Webber, who wrote Jesus Christ Superstar and Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, he also wrote the highest selling musicals of all time, um, which is Phantom of the Opera. And again, that is just a pure return to traditionalism. And I mean, that is the opera. It is truly as opera as modern theater typically gets. Um, and so Phantom of the Opera was written a little bit later. He also wrote Cats, which was not um, as popular as his others, but still massively popular. It ran for a very long time on Broadway. And it's just because people liked the music. A lot of people, especially now, don't like Cats. That's at least my consensus. I've learned that a ton of people just don't like Cats. But I don't know why. Because I love cats. So, oh well. But yeah, and when it comes to that kind of stuff, it also kind of paved the way with these rock operas that were using big music and big spectacle. And, you know, with Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, of course, it was a show all about color and life and stuff like that. That paved the way for the mega musical. And the mega musicals, even today, are hugely popular. Every Disney musical I consider a mega musical. I mean, if you've seen Aladdin on Broadway, it's just huge. It is a mega musical. Wicked is another huge mega musical. Even Pippin, which was written earlier, but when it came back, it's a mega musical again. And it's those kind of things that really started in the later 70s, moving into the 80s and 90s, and now even in the 2000s. Mega musicals are widely popular because they're massively entertaining, and it makes theater more of an experience. I mean, even Lion King is a mega musical. I guess it is a Disney musical as well. I didn't even think about that, but it's a mega musical. The costumes, the lighting, the music, everything about it is huge. And so, you know, these mega musicals have kind of really tailored the audience's expectations when they go to a Broadway show. You know, it's not truly a Broadway show unless there's, you know, pyrotechnics and a huge laser lighting display and you know, people fly through the air. And so with that kind of progression, especially recently, it's been hard to get people's expectations a little bit lower than that when the time calls for it. Because not every show needs to be a massive spectacle. Once on This Island doesn't need to be a massive spectacle. Next to Normal doesn't need to be a massive spectacle. And so subverting the audience expectation at this point is a little bit more difficult. But that's when you start getting into the realm of the pop musical. And so pop musicals are less mega, but they still incorporate the music of today and the feelings of today. It's basically the entire history of Broadway put together into now. It's the stories of the book musical and the inclusion of Showboat and, you know, introducing all minorities into the mix, and the largeness of the mega musical without so much spectacle, and the unconventionalism of the musicals of the early 70s and late 60s, and the jazz influence of the 50s. It's everything combined together to what Broadway is now. And without all of those things, you don't get Dear Evan Hansen, you don't get Hamilton, which is unconventional in and of itself. And you don't get Waitress, which is a musical written completely and entirely by a singer-songwriter. You don't get these types of musicals without the entire Broadway history that was, and every little door that opened up to make that stuff possible. And so today, you know, with Dear Evan Hansen, it's still a spectacle. You get a light show, you get technology in there, you get like testimonials up on backdrops, and it's all about social media, so you get a little bit of that media element to it. With Hamilton, it's unconventional in the sense that minorities are playing traditionally white characters from our American history, and American history is now being told in hip hop, and the entire Broadway musical is made with hip hop, and it's awesome. And Waitress is completely singer-songwriter, and it sounds exactly, I mean, even the performances that aren't Sarah Bareilles sound like Sarah Bareilles. And so you get that quality to it. You get musicals like Once that are, the band is on the stage, and the performers, the actors, play some of the instruments. And you get all kinds of really, really cool, unconventional ideas, because that's what Broadway has led to. And so when thinking about what Broadway might be in the future, first of all, it's super interesting now. Because right now, we're at a time where Broadway can't really exist. Or at least it's very difficult for it to exist. In this world of social distancing, and, everything is being, unsafe right now. So you have to stay at home, or, you can't have these live shows. Broadway ceases to exist in this world. And so I guess for the last little bit of this, the main question that was posed to me at the beginning was, where is Broadway going to go in the future? And I'll talk a little bit about where it's already going, and then what I hope it does in the future. Where it's already going is easy. Like I said, there have been movies that have come out like Sweeney Todd and Into the Woods, and that's where Broadway's going. If you want to watch Hairspray, you can just pop in the DVD with John Travolta, and you can watch Hairspray that way. If you, if you want to watch a movie musical, pop in Mamma Mia. Watch a movie musical. They're all over the place. And of course, Disney does this more often than not. Most of their musicals start out as films and then move to Broadway because they're popular, like Frozen and Aladdin. But of course, they start as films. Broadway does the same thing. And I think the movie musical is becoming really what Broadway is. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, even Hamilton just put out... Now, Hamilton filmed the stage version. Hamilton filmed the live version. But I think that's where Broadway is headed right now, especially. I think you're going to get a group of 20 or 30 actors together, and they're all going to act on stage for cameras, and that's what Broadway's going to be, at least for the time being. And I hate to think that that's the end-all be-all of Broadway, because there's just something about live theater that's unlike anything else. And so I'd like to see more live theater. But the way it's going right now, we live in a world of Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, and I just see a lot of live theater turning into a streamed event. Well, heck, I'm streaming right now. This is my version of live theater. And, I hate to think that Broadway is going to end up just being something that you can flip on Twitch. But yeah, exactly, Pablo. There's no business like it. There's no business like show business. And it's it's a little bit sad to think about it like that, but it's also very true. And you know, so film musicals have been around since the 1920s, but today they're more popular than ever, and they keep growing in popularity as people stop leaving the house and as people stop going to live theater events. It's easier to watch a musical at home than it is to buy tickets. It's easier to pay $20 for a subscription to whatever and watch theater there than it is to pay hundreds of dollars for a Broadway seat and then also travel to get there. I've never seen a show on Broadway. I've seen shows on Broadway in Chicago, but I've never seen a show in New York on Broadway. It's hard to get there. And so I see a lot of people turning to streaming, and I see a lot of musicals taking advantage of that and saying, well, our audience is here, let's tailor to that. Because to be honest, even though it is creative and it is about art, theater is still inherently a business. You've got to pay the actors. You've got to pay the technicians. You've got to pay the directors and the writers. You've got to pay everyone involved, the producers, everyone. And if you can't pay people because nobody's coming to see the show, then you tailor it to your audience. And so I think a lot of theater will just become on television, on the screen. But I do hope to see that change. I really do. And one of the ways I hope that it'll change is I hope that it will change in a little bit more of a cyclical fashion. So, as we talked about before, 1920s was the introduction of African Americans, minorities, into the theater. I think we're repeating that 100 years later. Just like Rent in the 1990s repeated its predecessor, which escapes me, La Boheme. It's the opera that Rent was based on, La Boheme. It succeeded it by 100 years, exactly, almost, within the decade, which is pretty insane when you think about it, that La Boheme was written in the 1890s and performed in the 1890s, and then Rent, 100 years later, written about the same topic, based on the same story, was just as powerful exactly 100 years later. It's crazy. And I think we're doing the same thing in Broadway. I think in the late teens, early 20s, we're going to have a huge insurgence of minorities in theater. I think we're going to say enough is enough. Let's include everyone and let's tell all the stories. And then, as we progress through that, we're going to say, okay, we need to take it back to simpler times. Woo! Yeah, exactly. from my best Mexican friend, a woo for minorities being in theater, of course. And then after that, within the next few decades, I think we'll want to get back to simpler times. I think the world is complicated right now. And I think especially with politics the way they are, I think America is going to want a break. I know I already want a break, but I don't think it will artistically show for the next couple of years, maybe couple of decades even. And artistically, right around the 30s and 40s, the 2030s and 40s, we'll start to get into more simplistic musicals like Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals. And then, as we progress, we'll need something to make that simplicity interesting. Now, of course, it won't be jazz, even though if I had my way, it would be. I think it'll be something else. I think it'll be whatever is popular at the time. I think we'll need to inject some life into that simplicity. And I think Broadway will just keep making that circle as long as society allows it to. And unfortunately, the way I see it right now, society is very cyclical. And we see a lot of the same things happening. I mean, right now, we're having a huge civil rights movement. Again. Again. Not quite 100 years later, but still close enough. And it's huge. And I think art will show that. I think art will really latch on to that idea. I want to read your comment. I trust that there will always be a place for live theater. People need a powerful outlet for their frustration of our current time. Film or stream can't fill that need. I agree. There is something very special about live theater that is unlike anything else. I know from watching Hamilton, because Hamilton just came out on Disney Plus recently, watching Hamilton on Disney Plus is so much different than being there and watching it live. It's good regardless. It's amazing regardless. But there's something about, if I can quote the musical, being in the room where it happened. There's something about it. The energy there, the feeling that you get being there, the emotions that are triggered, feeling that all around you, watching the actors working the way they do, watching everything happening right in front of your eyes, not hindered by a screen. That's amazing and unique. And although although we are breaking apart from it, I think people need it. And I don't think it will ever truly die. I just think it will become less popular, unfortunately. But I always know that there will be people like me who will want to go see live theater as long as I live. So, I don't think there will ever be a time in my lifetime where there is no such thing as live theater. Because I think there are enough people like me who like it and who want it in their lives. And so, with that, I think that's where Broadway is going. I do have one more hope for Broadway as far as the future goes. And for those of you who don't know, the reason I have one more hope is because I'm writing a musical. And I'd truly like to see my musical on Broadway one day. But just that. I truly do hope that I have a place on Broadway eventually. I have a musical right now that is currently called Outstanding, and I think in the time that we have remaining, I might play a little bit from it, just because I can, because it's my stream and I'll do what I want, and it's exciting to me because it's different than anything else that's out there already, and I feel like it's just what we need right now. Not that it's super powerful or like the next, movement to save the United States, but I feel like it is both fun and uplifting, but also it tackles some issues when it comes to things that haven't been talked about a ton. It's a lot of if I could give you a brief overview, it's a musical about a high school baseball team, and more specifically, the musical is about specific kids on the team and their relationship with their parents. Because as a lot of you know, sports parents can be all parents at some point in time, whether it's sports or theater or anything, can be a little bit overbearing, whether it's overprotective or whether it's encouraging even when that's not what you want as a child, or whether it's pushing you to be better than you can be, or pushing you to do something you don't necessarily want to do, or living vicariously through the child and stuff like that, you know? So it touches on a lot of those issues. And it also touches on issues within the kids themselves. And yeah, I knew you were going to comment about it because you're my mother. It's fine. But it touches on those sort of issues. And not only just with the parents, of course, but with the other kids and with the pressure that their parents are putting on them, but with the pressure that they're putting on each other and that they put on themselves. And so although it is light and uplifting and happy, and of course there's going to be a happy ending, spoiler alert, there's going to be a happy ending to it, of course. But even with all of that, there's still the pressures of being a teenager playing a baseball game. And it combines my two loves, baseball and theater. And so it's been an amazing experience writing them. And I think I'm going to play a little for you now. I'm going to drink some tea. So what I'm going to do for you guys is I am going to go ahead and play the title song from the musical. The musical is called Outstanding, and so is the song, hence being the title song of the musical. And so this song is the main character, Richie, and he's singing about how he's a center fielder for the baseball team, the A's, and he is singing about how he doesn't want to be a baseball player, but rather his entire life he has wanted to be a theater kid. You could maybe see where I got the inspiration for this song, but I'm gonna go ahead and sing it for you. So here we go. Maybe if I can get all set up. I don't have an extra webcam, so this is all you get, guys. I apologize. Let's hear what I sound like. How do I sound? Gross. All right. Also, just so you know, I won't be reading chat because I can't see it from here. Alrighty. Center field, born a Houston, so my fate was sealed. My dad gave me his father's favorite glove. Here I am past second base, adjust my hat and wipe the sweat off my face. I live a life, but it's not the life I love. I see my name in lights, Houston to appear, but I'm outstanding in his field, outstanding in his field, whoa, outstanding in his field. I've always longed to be center stage. I'd read a script and the words would fall right off the page. star in a Broadway musical. I've always wanted to be in the spotlight, entertain a different crowd every night. Now wouldn't that be so incredible? But instead I stand wondering why I'm here, outstanding in this field, outstanding in this field, whoa, outstanding in this field. I've always lived in Father's shadow. When will it be my time? I've always been afraid to show him the dream I had inside. But all I know is that's not me. I wish someone could set me free so I could be outstanding in my field. Outstanding in my field. And that is Outstanding in My Field. Or the song Outstanding. So, yeah, I eventually hope to get that full musical written. I'm very excited about it. I hope now that the world has gotten a taste that you guys are excited about it too, or at least half as excited as I am. Because, I just can't wait to get it out there into the world. I have plenty of songs written. I have a lot half written. And then the dialogue is a solid work in progress. I need to give a shout out to my writing partner, Ezra, who is helping me work on the dialogue of it because, boy, I am not a script writer. I'm not a book writer at all. Pablo knows. Pablo is also one of my writing partners, so I just sit here and tinker around on the piano, basically. But yeah, that's where I hope Broadway goes in the future. I hope I have a place, somewhere come 2027 or something like that on the Broadway marquee. But just to wrap things up, Broadway constantly opens doors, and Broadway musicals in history opened doors and shaped society, and society shaped Broadway into what it is today. And we can constantly draw from the past influences, and in the present, when we add our own creative elements, it can change literally the course of history. And it can change how people think and how people react to certain situations, and it's just amazing. And to think that the 786 different shows that have been written from the late 1800s to 2019, to think that they all got us this far is amazing. And I truly hope that within the next 153 years, there's another 786 Broadway musicals for somebody like me to be impressed with. And so anyway, with that, I think that is the end of our stream. Unless you guys, of course, have any burning questions, which I would love to answer, whether they're about Broadway or not. because I'm here for you guys, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. And yeah, if you guys have any questions about Broadway, feel free to let me know. I of course have with me a list of songs that you should all listen to from various different musicals that I talked about today. But yeah, you guys should. I'll do something with this list. I'll post it in the comments on the YouTube page. Ooh, that's a great question, Pablo. Top 3 underrated Broadway shows. Top 3 underrated Broadway shows. Let's think here. So with them being underrated, I think anything new is a little too overrated. I think Broadway has hit like peak popularity right now. I think Chorus Line is one of them. I think Chorus Line is very underrated. Not a lot of people do it, for sure. And so I think that would have to be one of the top 3. Let's see. Other underrated musicals. Hello, Dolly is one that everybody kind of passes off, but it's great. It's fantastic. And one that not many people have heard of, but is actually fairly new, is Next to Normal. I can't say enough good things about Next to Normal. It's a very underrated musical. I'm gonna add another one. I'm gonna make it a top 4. But so Next to Normal, highly underrated show. Very, very, very close to a rock opera, but there is dialogue in it, and so it's not technically a rock opera, but it does have, I believe it's 39 songs in it, which is insane for a Broadway musical. Usually they have like 18, and so 39 songs is crazy, and each one of them is very specifically written, and each one of them sounds different. And it tells the story of a bipolar depressive mother who is having troubles letting go of events that happened in the past and really truly living with her current family. And so it's a beautiful story, highly underrated. And then the other underrated musical was actually written by the same pair of people, Tom Kitt and Brian Yorkey, who wrote Next to Normal. They also wrote If Then. And If Then is another underrated musical. So I gave you 4. Sorry, you only asked for 3, but I had to give you that 4th. Because, like, nobody's heard of If Then, but it's absolutely fantastic as well. The music in it is just incredible. And actually, for it not having as much popularity as... or for it having the minimal popularity that it has, it had Idina Menzel in it, so you would think that it'd be more popular, but not many people have heard of it, so there's one. Yeah, but do you guys have any more questions? Because I'd love to answer them for you. If not, I will just sip my tea. Also, I desperately want things that I want turned into Broadway shows, just to put that out on the table in case that's a question for anyone. I definitely want Prince of Egypt to become a Broadway show. I know it's already a musical, but it's not full Broadway. And I definitely want the Road to El Dorado to become a Broadway musical, because it's who was it? Who wrote it? Was it Elton John? No. It was Elton John. Tell me, was it Elton John? I can't remember. But it's a fantastic score. It's an absolutely fantastic soundtrack. No, I feel like it wasn't Elton John. I feel like it was okay, it was Elton. There we go. It's Elton John and somebody else, though. It's Elton John and, no, it's Elton John and Tim Rice. That's right. Yeah, they wrote it as well as Aida and Lion King and the rest. But yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Ironically, it's not Disney, but it would just make a beautiful musical. I would love to see it. But yeah, anyway. You guys have been absolutely amazing. So thank you for tuning in. And if you're watching this later on YouTube, feel free to drop a like and hit that subscribe button. If you end up watching this on Twitch later, be sure to follow me here. I appreciate it when you show up and chat. I love chatting with you guys. But I'm going to send you off. I don't know who I'm going to send you to, though. That's the real question. Who shall I raid today? So it looks like Jevin is playing Minecraft, and Brody Man is just chatting. So I'm going to send you over to Jevin. I know Minecraft isn't everybody's cup of tea, but I'm going to go ahead and send you over there. So feel free to watch if you'd like, and enjoy. And thank you guys so much for tuning into the stream. I really appreciate it. Have a great night, everyone.